Okay, here's the takeoff of Air India 171. They look like they're using the entire runway. We'll pretty much watch this one all the way through, and then I'll react to it after. He's really low. Oof. Can already tell the climb stopped. Ah, man. Oof. Brutal. I hate seeing that. Hey everybody, welcome to today's video. This is a follow-up of yesterday's video, and today I'll be specifically breaking down the takeoff from Air India flight 171. We're going to be going through a lot of the different updates that have happened since that last video was posted. And just to bring everybody up to speed, Air India flight 171, a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner crashed 30 seconds after takeoff from Ahmedabad, India. That was on June 12th, 2025. Unfortunately, this has likely killed at least 269 people, since people on the aircraft and on the ground have been killed. My thoughts and prayers are with all of those affected. And as in yesterday's video, I've got the lights in the background here tuned to yellow, and that's just a sign of support to the families and for all of those that have been affected by those that have passed on. I wish all those affected peace and eventually healing from this situation. And then keep in mind, guys, I'm a pilot on YouTube. I'm a former F-15E combat fighter pilot, F-16 Thunderbird pilot, A220 pilot, 737 pilot, been an airline pilot for years. So I'll just be breaking this down from my personal opinion. Nothing official. There will be a full investigation. So let's get right into the updates. A black box, likely the FDR, which is the flight data recorder, was pulled from the wreckage at the medical hostel. The Boeing 787-8 has two black boxes. One just wasn't enough. So the FDR, that logs tech data like altitude, speed, and engine performance. And then the cockpit voice recorder, the CVR, that captures pilot chatter and radio calls. Both are built to survive crashes and fires, so it makes them gold for investigations like this. The second black box, likely the CVR, is still missing, but this FDR is a big win as crucial data can be pulled from this. And then there's been circulated rumors of sabotage because of the Pakistan versus India conflict. That's essentially ruled out. I couldn't find any information on that is actually credible. So we're going to lean on this existing takeoff footage and then the Mayday calls. That's kind of going to be the crux of what we check out today. India's aviation ministry has ordered safety checks on all of India's 787-8s and -9 fleets. No groundings have happened yet. All right, so let's step back to the footage. So it's a little bit grainy, unfortunately, especially once it zooms in. Okay, so as the Dreamliner goes past right now, again, I can't tell the exact flap position because it's so grainy, but it doesn't look like a lot of flaps. And if this was an intersection takeoff, which we'll get to here in a second, it would need a ton of flaps, which would be like flaps 15 in a Boeing 787. This could potentially be flaps 1, which is mainly just slats, which would be leading edge flaps, leading edge devices that would be going down kind of in front, so they would be harder to see from this angle. But this looks like a very low flap setting, if any. So if there was 0 flaps, there would likely be lots of bells and whistles going off with a takeoff warning system being integrated into the Boeing 787. It'd be screaming at these pilots, telling them they don't have flaps. But if they do have the incorrect flap setting, then there's a chance that it's not going to give them as many warnings or any warnings at all. So if they're at flap 1 when they should potentially be at flap 5, that could be a situation that could be developing here. But it looks like minimal flaps. I can't say that there's 0, but it looks like minimal. So potentially a flap 0 or a flap 1 setting. Very light on the flaps is what it looks like to me. Just my opinion there. We'll continue there on the takeoff roll. They're using a ton of the runway. 11,500 feet is the length of the runway. And we can jump back to the taxiway diagram here in a second. And then at liftoff, it does look like maybe a slight wing down for a second, but then it gets back to a wings level scenario relatively quickly. But they're basically using, from what it looks like in this video, brick the last brick of the runway, which is something that you don't do typically in an airliner. And then you can see the dust blowing off. That's probably from the departure end of the runway as the exhaust from an engine or both engines is pouring over the dirt, and that's kicking up that dust. So it does look like a little bit actually of yaw there. And I looked at the departure end of where the crash happens, and there is a roughly 30-degree change. So there is a slight skew off to the side. So there he goes at the wings level point, but right there, that's the top, roughly 600 feet and some change is the top of their climb. And then they're going to start coming down, which is just not a normal situation. Man, that's just brutal. You can see the wing flex there, even though it's a grainy image. Oh, man, it's just brutal. Right there in the cockpit, pandemonium. The gear are staying down. Definitely odd situation. The flaps are at a very low setting or a no setting. And the pilots are going to get out a Mayday call, which we'll review here in a second. Oh, man, I just hate seeing that. And then, oh, man, that's just so devastating, so final. These aviation crashes are just so final, and no ejection seats, no parachutes. At the end of the day, as the pilots in the front, that something catastrophic is happening. It's just super unfortunate. So let's actually step to some of the footage of the cell phone. All right, before we go on with the video and the other updates, I want to quickly let you guys listen to this cell phone video. So I'm going to turn the mic towards the speakers here, and I want you guys to hear potentially what's going on as the 787 flies over. That sound right there, that's what I want you guys to hone in on, because there are claims that the rat gin was deployed, and we're going to get to that in a second. But if it was, that would tell us a lot about what's going on with this Dreamliner. Ah, man, just unfortunate there. I mean, it does seem to me like there is a bit of a prop sound coming from the jet. It's hard to tell because it's cell phone video, but let's step to some actual rat gins that are deployed on 787s, and let's see if we can get any similarity in the sound. So this is a Boeing 787 landing with its rat deployed for maintenance purposes, so let's check this out. So I don't know if you guys could hear that, but to me, it did sound a little bit similar to Air India 171. So the deployment of a rat on a Boeing 787 indicates some really intense red flags. So the aircraft with a rat deployed is experiencing a significant emergency, or they're doing testing. So the deployment of that rat on a Boeing 787 indicates that the aircraft is experiencing a significant emergency. That typically involves a loss of primary and auxiliary power sources. The rat, it's basically a small wind turbine that deploys, a ram air turbine, and it deploys from the aircraft's fuselage to generate emergency electrical and hydraulic power for critical systems, such as flight controls, essential instrumentation, and navigation equipment. Here's what the rat deployment means in the context of a Boeing 787. So it could mean both engines fail, and that cuts off primary power, so the rat is needed. It could mean all three hydraulic systems lose pressure, which are vital for controlling the airplane. It could mean total electrical failure, where the engines and auxiliary power units, or the APU, the auxiliary power unit, can't supply power. So pilots can also manually deploy it if they detect a critical issue as well. So the rat powers a hydraulic pump for the center hydraulic system that keeps the flight controls like the ailerons and the elevators working, and that would check in the Air India situation with the wing staying level. It also powers an electrical generator for essential avionics like the cockpit displays and navigation systems. So here's the catch though, it only powers the bare minimum for the aircraft to fly and land safely. safely. But the rat's not perfect. It needs enough airspeed, somewhere around 130 knots, to work properly. So it might work for a little bit, but this aircraft, Air India 171, is going to slope likely below 130 knots during that time of descent. So as you guys know from my video yesterday, the Dreamliner, it's a tech titan. Its systems are key to this puzzle, obviously, as we've talked about so far. It launched in 2011. It's got a 50% composite ratio, and that's for efficiency. So for such a big aircraft, it is actually extremely light. Air India's VT-A and B, that's what the crashed jet's call sign was. It was 11 years old, 41,000 flight hours on this thing, and 8,000 takeoffs and landings. So normal for a jet of this age. So let's talk about the key systems. 2 GE/GE-NX 1B67 engines, 67,000 pounds of thrust, digitally controlled, but obviously all engines can be at risks of fuel issues or bird strikes. It's got a fly-by-wire system. That means 3 computers are processing the pilot's inputs, and those need steady electrical power, obviously. And then the electrical system, 6 generators, 4 engine, 2 APU-driven generators, and those churn out 1.45 megawatts for flaps, gear, and avionics. What's a megawatt? I have no idea. That's above my pay grade. And then the 787 also has an auto rudder system, and that counters asymmetric thrust in the event of an engine failure on takeoff. So the tech behind the 787, I gotta say, it does make it a safety standout. And until Flight 171's deadly plunge, the 787 has had a stellar safety record. So let's get to the Mayday Call. So this was a total flight time of 30 seconds, and the Mayday Call was squeezed out during that crucial time. At 1:38:25 p.m., 25 seconds post-takeoff, the crew squeezed out a radio call. Mayday, Mayday, Air India 171, loss of control, engine failure. No further contact and no new ATC audio has been released from what I've seen at the time of this video being released. And there was one survivor, and that's just a miracle. The survivor did report hearing a loud bang 30 seconds after takeoff, but that could potentially be the initial contact with some of the buildings that Flight 171 made. So again, that's CVR, that cockpit voice recorder, if it's found, it could definitely nail exactly what they meant by that Mayday call, and it could tell us what we're seeing during that fog that could happen with some sort of emergency happening during the takeoff roll, right after takeoff, or right after initial climb. There's going to be a lot of pandemonium in that cockpit. Pilots are not robots, so there's going to be some reaction time and some delay. So that might be some of the reasoning behind the gear not being raised. If they're looking and analyzing some sort of engine failure, that could really slow time down and make certain tasks basically seem extremely complex, even though they're not. Raising the gear seems simple, but if you're dealing with some sort of engine issue, it might totally distract you from simple tasks. So let's talk about the fuel supply failure theory and see if we can rule that out or if there's any credibility to it. So that theory is sizzling with debate right now. So the fuel supply theory, there's X posts, there's theories all over the internet, and it suggests that this 787's engines didn't get enough fuel, and that triggered a catastrophic chain. So here's the deal. The core issue, low fuel flow, is what they're saying in some of these posts. They're saying that these starved the GE/GE-NX engines, and that likely caused the Mayday and the engine failure call from the pilots. What could cause that? So pressure buildup could cause that, and insufficient fuel could spike pressure in the fuel system, stressing engine parts. Dual engine failure could happen due to this situation, and that could kill both engines. That's a super rare situation, but it's obviously an aviation nightmare. What could be the causes of that? Let's talk about vapor lock. So at 40 degrees Celsius, which was the reported temperature for Air India's Flight 171, warm fuel and the weather conditions with that high temperature during that initial climb out can form vapor bubbles. Those block fuel lines. So that could be deadly during takeoff, but again, an extremely rare situation. And there is tech intertwined into that fuel system to try to prevent this from happening. But engine-driven fuel pump failure could be another part of the situation. So a busted pump could choke fuel delivery, and that could slash the power that is pumping fuel to these engines. But then other issues could be at risk as well. So contaminated fuel, leaks, or tank problems could also starve the engines. So in this investigation, they'll dig into everything. They'll dig into the pilots, they'll dig into the mechanics, the weather, and specifically fuel issues like this vapor lock situation. All right, so let's quickly talk about the flap setting for a fully loaded Boeing 787-8 on a 30 to 40 degrees Celsius day. So on a Metabaz runway 23, it's 3,500 meters long. So we're looking looking at roughly 11,500 feet. So at 40 degrees Celsius, it's thinning air. And for a Boeing 787-8 at max takeoff weight, 227,930 kilograms, 502,500 pounds, 100 tons of fuel, which is 220,500 pounds of fuel and 242 people, a Flaps 5 or a Flaps 15 are going to be a standard takeoff configuration for the Boeing 787. Flaps 15, likely at 40 degrees Celsius, that'll boost lift, and that's needed. And the takeoff roll for that, it's going to be somewhere around 2,240 meters or 7,200 feet. So that's going to be a safe takeoff roll, and that would actually be a pretty low takeoff roll if a Flaps 15 is used. And again, if there was an incorrect flap setting, you should get a config flaps warning, and that would be a red alert to the pilots to make sure they change their flap setting to what they have selected for takeoff. Okay, the last thing I want to hit at, guys, is the VSpeeds chart. So VSpeeds can get a little bit murky, but let's talk about engine failure, because if something's happening on that runway, it could make sense why they're using the last brick of the runway for takeoff and why it doesn't climb away relatively fast after takeoff. Even with one engine providing thrust, it should accelerate and climb faster than what it does in this takeoff video. So let's do a quick explainer on the VSpeeds. Those are critical speeds used by pilots during takeoff. They're like checkpoints in a race car. So V1, that's the decision speed. That's somewhere around 130 to 150 knots for a 787-8. And that's where the pilot must choose. They have to abort the takeoff prior to that or keep going if something happens after that. So if there's an engine failure prior to V1, you have to abort the takeoff in order to not go off the end of the runway. You can't continue the takeoff. And then VR, that's the rotation speed. That's going to be somewhere around 140 to 150 knots, and that's when the pilot pulls back on the yoke to lift off. And then V2, that's the safe climb speed. That's the speed you want to get to after airborne as fast as possible. That's going to be somewhere around 160 knots, and that's going to ensure the plane can climb safely away from the ground, even on one engine. And the key there is on the one engine. So these speeds are calculated before takeoff. They're based on weight, weather, and runway length, and they're make or break speeds in a crisis. You have to analyze these extremely fast. If there was some sort of engine failure and a low climb rate, it's definitely possible to delay that gear retraction. And then if you started to sink, now you're really looking outside, you're getting ground rush, and the captain and the first officer might have just forgotten to put the gear up. That's one plausible situation. The Mayday Call suggests that they continued their takeoff and it was too late to abort. So that would mean if they did everything correct, the engine failure happened after V1. But if the engine failure happened prior to V1, it could mean that they have insufficient airspeed to climb and reach that safe V2 climb speed. And then lastly, I just want to hit on that takeoff video showing the dirt kicking up off of runway 23's side at liftoff. It hints at a yaw potentially from an engine failure, or it could be just at the end of the runway because they needed all of the runway because they accidentally continued the takeoff with an engine failure before V1. But Ahmedabad's dusty terrain, it does make dirt clouds, and that could be normal for a heavy 787-8 aircraft. Single engine failure causes yaw, but auto rudder corrects it. So the video shows no significant drift after takeoff, nothing crazy. So dirt's likely just the dust being kicked up. So guys, the takeoff video, that's the smoking gun. Likely a lot of information is going to come from that video. I hope this video helped you understand more about the takeoff decisions and the unlikely situation of if a pilot does continue the takeoff with an engine failure prior to V1, the low climb rate as you're climbing out, especially with a low flap setting, and then forgetting to put the gear up due to some sort of chaos in the cockpit. That could be one situation. Again, once we get both of these black boxes, we'll have a much better understanding of what happened. Thanks so much for checking out this video. I really appreciate it. I've got video number 1. If you haven't checked that out, go ahead and pop over to that as well. And then check out this video right here. I'll see you on this video right here. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, and I'll see you on this video right here. This is Ryan, also known as Max Afterburner, signing off.